Are the government lying to you about childcare? It sure feels that way. In the childcare field, we're a group of passionate childcare providers, and some of us have had enough. After years of dedication to caring for children, we're seeing our nurseries pushed to the brink, then blamed for it. Politicians boast about saving parents money, and the media screams about nursery dangers. But behind the headlines lies a story of government deception and neglect. Today I'm speaking out with concern, with disappointment, but also with unity and determination. Because while ministers promise the world to parents, the government funding is failing nurseries, and they're covering it up with misleading claims. In this video, we'll expose how recent reports have twisted facts to paint our sector as unsafe and inferior, how the government is unfairly favouring school-based nurseries while starving others, and why we, the private and community nurseries, childminders and early years educators, must stand together. This is our story, and it's time to set the record straight. For this video, I'm skipping my intro so that we can dive straight in. So you may have seen some misleading headlines about the 40% rise in serious childcare incidents at nurseries. The BBC ran this story, and other platforms like NetMums have amplified it, starting in parents everywhere. They claim that over the past 5 years, there's been almost 20,000 reports of serious incidents in nurseries, roughly 75 significant events every week. It sounds terrifying, as if our nurseries have suddenly become dangerous places, but this is incredibly misleading, and here's why. What they didn't tell you is that Ofsted, the regulator for nurseries, childminders and other childcare providers, changed its reporting requirement. Now nurseries must report every single significant event as a serious incident, even if it's not actually that serious. In practice, this means we have to log all kinds of things that previously wouldn't have been counted as incidents at all. For example, if there's a minor change in your setting, say a new manager's coming aboard, a temporary closure due to a burst pipe, or even certain staff health updates, we're required to notify Ofsted as a significant event. No harm to a child is needed for it to count. Imagine suddenly deciding that all these incidents now need to be reported as a serious incident. Of course the numbers will shoot up, and that's exactly what's happened. The 40% rise wasn't because nurseries suddenly got more dangerous overnight. It's because the goalpost for reporting moved. We're simply following stricter rules and logging things that would never have been logged before. Yet the media span this to make it sound like children are in peril like never before, which isn't just unfair, it's wrong. The vast majority of these serious incidences are bureaucratic in nature or extremely minor. Nurseries and other childcare providers have been reporting them out of abundance of caution and compliance, not because children were being harmed. In fact, genuine cases of serious harm or neglect remain extremely rare. Don't just take my word for it. Look at the stats. Nearly all nurseries are safe and high quality. Even The Guardian noted that 97% of nurseries in England were rated good or outstanding under Ofsted's framework. That means that most nurseries, whether private, voluntary or school-based, are meeting high standards. So why is the media suddenly suggesting otherwise? It's hard not to feel that this scare has been manufactured, a convenient excuse to tighten the screws on private nurseries or justify new policies. But we won't let fear-mongering go unchallenged. My message to parents: don't be misled by these skewed statistics. Your child's nursery is overwhelmingly likely to be safe, caring and professional, as it always has been. A quick reality check: the serious incident spike is a data illusion. It reflects paperwork changes, not an actual surge in children getting hurt. Nurseries' commitment to children's safety hasn't changed. What's changed is how Ofsted counts and labels incidents. We're as vigilant as ever, if not more, in protecting and educating our little ones. As if the misleading incident reports weren't enough, the BBC recently aired an investigation implying that nurseries might be faking their Ofsted inspections. Yes, you heard that right. They suggested that because Ofsted now sometimes give us a little bit of notice before an inspection, instead of just coming unannounced, nurseries are somehow able to cheat. According to this report, some nurseries might be bringing in extra staff for the day or set up fake activities just to impress inspectors. The insinuation that we're dishonest and only look good when we know we're being watched. Let's unpack that. First off, Ofsted introduced more short notice inspections during the COVID era for practical reasons, to ensure someone is on site, and with these, nurseries might get a call the afternoon before to say that an inspector will come the next day. That's usually it. A few hours notice, maybe overnight. The idea that we can magically overhaul our entire operation in that time is frankly absurd. We can't conjure up fully trained staff out of thin air or turn an inadequate setting an outstanding one overnight. Our day-to-day practices have to be solid, whether notice is given or not, because you cannot not fake an entire nursery's quality. Second, schools get even more notice for inspections, and nobody bats an eyelid about that. But when a primary or secondary school is due an Ofsted inspection, they typically receive the call the day before. Sometimes they even have a couple of days to prepare. But none of the BBC reports are accusing schools of staging fake lessons or hiding misbehaviour. Why is there this double standard? If nurseries are being accused of gaming the system, then why are schools not? And it's not just about notice. Many school-based nurseries haven't been inspected in years, but this wasn't mentioned by the BBC. Ofsted had a policy, which has now ended, that if a school was rated outstanding, it was exempt from routine re-inspections for years. Some schools went 10 plus years without an inspection, and since they removed that, when they did finally revisit these schools, a lot of them had slipped in standards. Meanwhile, nurseries, especially private ones, have faced frequent scrutiny. So if there was an opportunity to hide problems, school settings had the far bigger window to do so, not private nurseries or childminders. The BBC piece focused on one nursery that had a tragic incident, and then tried to generalise that thousands of children are being harmed, and nurseries can manipulate inspections. This broad brush painting is not only unfair, it's unsupported by evidence. Remember, Ofsted inspects early providers by the same standards. If giving notice truly lets everyone fake it, then school inspections would be a farce too, and we know that's not the case. The vast majority of providers, school or private, work hard every day to meet standards, and inspection is just a formal check of what we do continually. So if you're going to question the integrity of nursery inspections, hold everyone to account equally. Don't single out private nurseries and imply we need some kind of surprise ambush to show our true colours. Our true colours are on display every single day in how we care for children, how we communicate with parents, and uphold the EYFS. We have nothing to hide. In fact, many of us welcome short notice or even unannounced inspections. We're confident in what we do. We don't need weeks to prepare fancy window dressing. Our quality is in the act, and it's real. Unfortunately, this is not how the government is currently portraying us. Now let's address the elephant in the room. The government's push to expand school-based nurseries at the expense of private, volunteer and independent nurseries. Ministers have been busy promoting nurseries in primary schools as if they're the superior option. The narrative goes like, if we open more nursery classes in school, we can eventually replace those expensive private nurseries, save parents money and ensure higher quality. They make it sound like school equals good and private equals bad when it comes to early years provisions. But is there any truth in that? The short answer is no. It's a false narrative unsupported by any research or reality. Decades of research, from the EPPSE project to the studies by the Institute of Fiscal Studies or the Nuffield Foundation and many universities, have shown one consistent finding. What matters for children's outcome is the quality of early years education, not the type of setting. It's about what happens in the classroom or playroom, not whether the room is in a school building or a private nursery setting. But let's break down a few of their findings. Firstly, that high quality early education benefits children for the long term. The EPPSE study found that children who attended high quality preschool entered school with better social and cognitive skills, and these benefits could still be measured in the later years. Crucially, the study looked at all kinds of settings, from state nursery schools to nursery classes, playgroups and private nurseries, and identified quality teaching and interaction as the key factors. In other words, a great nursery is great regardless of who runs it. Another finding is that quality, not the label on the door, drives success. The Institute for Fiscal Studies analysed the impact of different preschool experiences and found no evidence that attending a school-based nursery provided any special advantage over a private nursery. If anything, their work and others suggest that the differences within each sector are bigger than the differences between sectors. There are fantastic private nurseries and fantastic school nurseries, and there are some weak ones in each of these as well. Another finding is that teacher qualifications and Ofsted ratings don't automatically guarantee better outcomes. Surprising, right? The Nuffield funded study matched 1.6 million children's early years outcomes with the type of nursery they attended. It found that children who went to an Ofsted outstanding rated nursery did only marginally better by 5 than those who went to a setting that was rated good. Having a teacher with a degree in the nursery had at most a tiny effect on children's early learning. In fact, the researchers concluded that current measures of quality, like ratings or having a teacher present, are not able to explain much of the variation in the children's outcomes. So to sum that up, an outstanding school nursery and a good private nursery both help children, and the difference in children outcomes between them was negligible. So the government's implication that school-based nurseries are inherently better is not supported by any evidence. Quality early education is what's crucial, and quality can be achieved in any setting with the right training, ratios, leadership and curriculum. Conversely, poor quality care can occur anywhere too if those elements aren't in place. We've seen wonderful practice in private nurseries and childminders homes, and conversely there have been cases of inadequate practice in school nurseries too. No sector has the monopoly on perfection. It's also worth noting that all Ofsted registered early providers follow the same EYFS framework and standards, whether you're running a nursery attached to a school or an independent one on the high street. We all must meet identical requirements for safety, staff qualifications and ratios, and learning and development. We all undergo inspections under the same criteria. There's no separate stricter rulebook for private nurseries and a lenient one for schools. It's one rulebook for all. So when the government suggests that moving childcare into schools will magically improve quality, it's baffling. We're already doing everything schools do by law. The framework is literally the same. So let's put to bed the myth that a school-based nursery is automatically better for a child. Study after study confirms that what benefits children is a warm, stimulating environment, skilled and responsive caregivers or teachers, a rich variety of play and learning activities, and a consistent, secure relationship. None of these are exclusive to school settings. Private nurseries and childminders excel in these areas every day. Many of us have staff with degrees or early years teacher status. Many of us innovate with forest school sessions, sensory rooms, or language-rich curriculum, and guess what? Ofsted agrees. As we said, 97% of all nurseries across sectors are good or outstanding. That includes thousands of private nurseries that are knocking it out of the park. So parents, when you hear a minister insinuate that you should trust a school nursery more than a local community nursery, remember, they're selling a narrative, not citing facts. Your child will thrive in any setting that is loving, safe, and enriching. Those qualities are found in both the maintained school sector and the PVI sector. The government should be supporting quality everywhere, not picking favourites based on ideology or cost. Let's talk about something that really annoys me: the government's hypocrisy in handling nursery closures as new openings. Across the country, the government recently launched a scheme where schools get funding to open new nurseries in their premises. And what has this led to? Private nurseries that were operating within the school and doing a great job at doing so, some of them have been kicked out, their leases being cancelled, and schools opening their own nursery within their school and branding it as brand new. You may have seen it in your own school or community, that long-standing nursery that suddenly announced it couldn't afford to go on, or a childminder that recently closed down their business. Many of the 300 new nurseries opening in schools that you've seen advertised are not actually new, with some of them being previously private nurseries, which has cost the government. They're claiming that these new school nurseries will save parents money. Officials tout that parents could save thousands on childcare by using these school-based places, but this funding is already available wherever you use it, whether you use it in a school or in a private nursery. They're not saving parents money by opening these school nurseries, but this marketing campaign has led to parents believing that school nurseries are better for them and for their child. Now, I'm speaking out not to knock school nurseries, they have a role, but to highlight the injustice of celebrating these new places that are in many cases simply replacements. It's like patting yourself on the back for building one house while a whole street is on fire. Now let's dig into the aspect the government glosses over. School-based nurseries are not a like-for-like replacement for what's being lost. There are limitations and trade-offs when you move childcare primarily onto school sites, and these matter a lot to parents and children. Firstly, the term time only care. Most school-run nurseries operate on a school calendar. That means they're open for roughly 38 weeks a year, Monday to Friday, typically 9 to 3 p.m. So come school holidays, Christmas, Easter, and a long summer break, they close. Now imagine you're a working parent. You don't get 13 weeks of holiday break from your job. So what do you do in these weeks when your nursery school is shut? You scramble. Maybe relatives help, maybe patch together holiday clubs if any will take under fives, or you take unpaid leave. It's a huge headache and expense. Private nurseries, on the other hand, usually operate all year round, closing only for a few days over Christmas and bank holidays. They provide continuity of care for 48 to 51 weeks a year. That consistency is a lifeline for working families. When a private nursery is replaced by a term-time school nursery, parents lose that reliable year-round option. This is often glossed over in government announcements. School nurseries also offer shorter hours and are less flexible. That may extend to nursery-age kids, but many do not for toddlers. A standard day might be 9 to 3 or even just a morning or afternoon session for 3 hours. Private nurseries operate much longer, from around 7:30 to 6 p.m, covering a full working day. They also allow parents to drop off early and pick up late, often with options for part-time or extended hours. That flexibility is critical. Without it, two working parents might find a school nursery day too short to cover their work schedule. They'll need childminders or relatives to bridge a gap, adding complexity. The government rarely mentions this issue of hours. They talk about places as if each place is equal, but a place that covers 30 hours per week for 38 weeks a year is not the same as a place that covers 50 hours per week for 50 weeks a year. Also, most school nurseries focus on ages 3 to 4 years old, the year or two before reception. Some are starting to take 2-year-olds, especially if there's funding for disadvantaged twos, and an even smaller number might take on babies, if they set up a separate provision. Meanwhile, PVIs often take children from as young as 6 months all the way up to school age. That means a child can start as an infant in a loving nursery environment and stay until they transition to primary school. The benefits of that continuity are huge. The child is deeply comfortable, the educators know the child's history, and parents build a long-term trust with one provider. If a baby's nursery closes and a later school nursery opens, that baby has nowhere to go until they're at least 2 or 3. The family has to find alternative care. The school nursery solution doesn't solve the problem for under 3s at all. This is especially concerning with the government promising childcare for younger ages. Who's going to care for 1 and 2-year-olds? They're going to have to lean on PVIs and childminders for that. In a mixed childcare market, parents sometimes use a combination of providers. For instance, a child might attend a school nursery in the morning and then go to a private nursery or childminder in the afternoon for wraparound care. Or a family might use a school nursery during term time and a private nursery in summer. These arrangements require coordination. Many PVIs and childminders have partnered up with schools to make such transition smooth, as we are truly in it for the best interest of children. But not every school is open to partnership or has something to offer beyond the core hours. Some school nurseries might say, we don't allow split placements. So when the government is promoting all about opening new nursery places in schools and how it will help parents, we have to shine a light on the real world drawbacks. A place in a school nursery might be great for some families, especially if they have older children at the same school. It's convenient for drop-off and pickups on the same site. But for many working families, a term-time schoolhouse place only covers a fraction of their childcare needs. Without private providers and childminders to fill the gaps, parents could actually find themselves worse off, juggling more arrangements, dealing with more disruption, and panicking during school holidays. And let's not forget, quality and individual attention can suffer if a one-size-fits-all approach is taken. PVIs come in all shapes and sizes. Small homey nurseries, forest schools, Montessori nurseries. Parents have a choice of ethos and environment. If everything is funneled into school nurseries, that diversity diminishes. Some children thrive in smaller settings or under the care of a consistent childminder rather than a large school class. We need multiple options to meet different needs. The bottom line, school nurseries are one piece of the puzzle, not the whole picture. They work best in partnership with the broader childcare sector, not as a replacement for it. By sidelining PVIs, the government risks breaking the system that parents rely on. Many school nurseries themselves value and rely on their relationship with PVIs. Let's talk numbers, because the mismatch between the government's promises and reality is stark. Ministers have announced what they call the largest investment in childcare, figures in the billions. They also keep referencing a manifesto pledge to create thousands of new nursery places in schools. It sounds impressive when delivered at a press conference, but when you look at what's actually happening on the ground, the picture is far less rosy. Here are some facts. The Department for Education recently put out a press release celebrating the approval of 300 new or expanded nursery places in schools. They hyped this as a massive boost and evidence they're delivering on promises. The funding for this phase was initially 50 million, but they more than doubled it to 37 million to fund all 300 places. So that's 37 million spent on new school nurseries. According to the Department for Education's own figures, those 300 school-based nurseries will offer 20 places on average, totaling up to 6,000. However, not all will be readily available. They expect up to 4,000 to be available by September, with the rest coming later. Now compare that to the demand. Why do they need to create these places? Because the government has promised a huge expansion of free childcare hours to younger ages. To make that possible, they estimated that 85,000 additional childcare places will be needed by September. That's right, 85,000 more places needed in England. So far, they've delivered roughly 4,000 of those through this school initiative. Even being generous with future phases, 6,000 places from the current scheme is a drop in the bucket. Let's do the maths. 85,000 places needed versus 6,000 created. That's not even 10% of the requirement. Even if they pour more money in, can schools realistically host 10 times that many new places soon? It's unlikely. There are only so many spare classrooms to convert and so many teachers to go around. It's clear that without the private sector, they can't meet their own targets. Yet they're not investing nearly as much in helping existing nurseries to do so. The focus is all on new places for schools, which, as we discussed, often doesn't compensate for places lost elsewhere. They also tout how this will save parents money, claiming, for instance, that the rollout of expanded 3 hours will save parents up to £75,000 a year. Again, this sounds great, but that saving only materialises if there's an actual place for your child. And right now, there's a huge gap between the political promise and the on-ground capacity. Many parents are already struggling to find a nursery spot or a childminder, especially for under twos. Without significant investment in every part of the sector, including recruiting and training thousands more staff, since an estimated 40,000 additional earlier staff are needed, those promises may ring hollow. In summary, the government's pledge to pour billions into childcare, primarily through school nurseries to create thousands of places and save parents money, the time frame to fill this gap is urgent, as parents will be eligible for these new 3 hours in a matter of months. But where will they actually use them if these places aren't created? We want parents and the public to understand the context. When these policies don't immediately deliver the relief promised, the blame might be again shifted to providers, with a view that nurseries aren't expanding fast enough or that the sector isn't stepping up. But in truth, we're eager to serve families, but need the support of funding and fair treatment to do so. The government can't starve us and then expect miracles. So to the policies, I suggest to don't throw money at shiny projects. Invest in saving and strengthening nurseries and childminders that already exist and have decades of expertise. And to fellow providers, don't be discouraged by this imbalance. See through the spin and keep advocating for the support we need to keep our doors open for childcare. We've seen this all before, if you remember Sure Start. If you're feeling a sense of deja vu listening to all this, you're not alone. We've been here before in a way. The tactics might be new, but the strategy of sidelining existing providers in favour of government-led initiatives has a precedent. Sure Start. Let's rewind to the 1990s and 2000s. At the time, the Labour government launched Sure Start children's centres with great fanfare. The idea was to have state-run centres in every community offering integrated early education, childcare, health services and parenting support. A one-stop shop for families with young children. It was ambitious and in many ways admirable, and don't get us wrong, it's some wonderful work in its heyday, especially in disadvantaged areas. I was a child that benefited from a Sure Start nursery. Maintained nursery schools and children's centres often provided excellent care and had well-qualified staff, just like many do today. But then, a decade later, the winds changed. A new government came in, the coalition in 2010, and austerity hit. Suddenly, the Sure Start centres were on the chopping block. Funding was slashed dramatically, and within a few years, hundreds of Sure Start centres had to close. By 2013, reports showed that over 400 centres had shut down in the first couple of years, and many others were hollowed out, open in name but no longer providing childcare or only serving a reduced role, and communities who had grown to rely on those services were left high and dry. And guess who had to fill the void? Private and voluntary providers. Us. Families still needed care and preschool education, so they returned to local nurseries, playgroups and childminders. The government, which had once touted Sure Start as the future and implicitly questioned the role of private nurseries, similar to what they're doing now, was now dependent on the PVI sector to absorb the demand. They introduced the funded hours for 2, 3 and 4-year-olds and relied on nurseries and childminders to deliver them, because many children's centres were gone or had no capacity. In essence, after the grand experiment, the government came full circle. They had to acknowledge the vital importance of the private and voluntary sector. Ministers went from championing state-led provision to praising private nurseries as the backbone of childcare. I distinctly recall around 2015 to 2017, various education ministers and even the Prime Minister highlighting how many childcare places are provided by private businesses and charities, and thanking them for their role. The pendulum swung back because reality struck. Without us, there simply wasn't enough provision. Now, why do I bring up Sure Start? Because today's scenario is eerily similar. The government is again pouring money into a state-led approach, this time via schools rather than standalone children's centres, and some in power are again casting doubt on the PVI sector. They might not be explicitly saying we want to replace private nurseries, but by focusing funding and political capital on school nurseries and allowing PVIs to struggle, that's effectively the direction. We worry that history could repeat. A few years down the line, this approach may falter, perhaps budgets will tighten, or the school system can't handle the load alone, and then the government will once again turn back to the private sector and say help. But by then, will we still be there in sufficient numbers? If dozens more nurseries close in the interim, you can't just regrow that overnight. The childcare sector isn't a tap you can turn on and off without consequences. Short starts rise and fall teaches us a crucial lesson. Sustainable childcare needs long-term support, not political grandstanding. You can't vilify or ignore one part of the system and expect to succeed. Ultimately, after the short start era, the government had to revitalise partnerships with PVIs and even reinvest in some of the very nurseries that had been overshadowed. I personally have no desire to see the school initiatives fail. I care about any setting that educates children, but I want to avoid a scenario where after causing avoidable damage, the government has to scramble to fix it. Let's learn from the past. A mixed economy of care where maintained and private sectors work together, each supported to play to their strengths, is the best way to ensure access and quality for all families. We knew this in the 2010s when the vast majority of the 30 hours free entitlement was delivered by PVIs, and we know it now. So to policymakers, don't repeat the mistakes of the past. Don't allow a divide and conquer mentality to ruin our sector. Support all providers fairly, and we'll more than rise to the challenge of providing world-class early education and care. To fellow nursery owners, managers and childminders, remember that we weathered the storms before. Short start came, went, and we remained. Other initiatives will come and go, but the work that we do day in, day out is enduring and irreplaceable. It's been a journey, hasn't it? But let's conclude this video. We started with scary headlines and end with lessons from history. So where does this leave us now? It leaves us with a clear call to action and a message of unity and hope. We must stick together. The government's campaign to favour one type of religion over another will not succeed if we present a unified front. We are not each other's enemies or competition. We are partners in giving children the best start. So let's continue sharing our stories, supporting one another and speaking up. When misinformation arises, we'll correct it. When one of us is treated unfairly, we'll rally around. Our strength is in our unity and our shared passion for children's well-being. To parents and families, I want you to know that we're on your side. Most of us got into this profession because we care deeply about your children. We understand the pressures you face juggling work and family, wanting the best care and education for your little ones. You might be feeling overwhelmed from constant policy announcements or worried by media reports, but rest assured, the vast majority of people looking after your children are dedicated, qualified and loving professionals, and will continue to be here for you, whether we're based in a school, private nursery, a village hall or home setting. All we ask is that you join us in holding the government accountable. Demand proper support for the nurseries and childminders that you rely on. Your voice matters. After all, you're voters too, and politicians ultimately listen to the public mood. And to the government and the media, stop scapegoating us. We'll not stand by quietly while our sector is scapegoated, undervalued or used as a pawn in political games. We're speaking out and we are here, and we'll keep on doing so. We'll highlight your successes when you get them right, but we'll also call you out on your failures when you get them wrong. We owe that to the profession and the families that we serve. So please work with us, not against us. Help us to provide continuous care that parents need, rather than undermining us and then trying to pick up the pieces later on. So in closing, let's remember why we're in this fight: for the children. Every child in our care, be it in a new school nursery or a cozy preschool or our home of a nurturing childminder, deserves stability, joy, learning and love. Every parent deserves to know their child is safe and thriving, and to be able to go to work without worry. These things don't happen by accident. They happen because of the hard work of providers and smart support from policymakers. We have the former in abundance. Just look at the dedication of earlier staff who often go above and beyond. But it's the latter that needs refining. So let's reject the false division. Let's demand the support we all need, and let's show why parents and children need us. Because when we stand united and strong, every family wins. But thank you for listening. Stay strong and stay informed, and continue to stand for children's future together. If you have found this informative or it resonates with you, please share it with others, parents, colleagues or even your local MP. The more people that know the truth, the better chance we have to make positive change. I want to thank you for watching and sticking with me as I release some of my frustration. God bless.